Hey everyone, Ben Coomber Radio, episode number 164. Now, we've got another transatlantic show. We are recording via the US, and I'm recording today with a guest that I have a huge amount of respect for. Someone that I believe has a lot of integrity. He's been in the industry a long time. He's built his business and his thought process on, values that he's stuck with and has evolved, and has been very honest with that in terms of how he preaches his work and how he tries to get the kind of point of education across to individuals. And that's something that I kind of feel that I resonate with. It's something that I try and pitch. This is a very honest podcast. I'm very real. I want to get to the crux of people's issues and help people as much as possible. And this is someone that I've been following for about 10 years. More so in the earlier part of my career, alongside people like Paul Check, John Berardi, DeFranco's Jim, guys that were really killing it in the US, because at the time, the US seemed to be putting out the best content in fitness about 10 years ago. The UK's catching up, I'm helping with that. But today, Jason Ferruggia, you're my guest. Hello.
Thank you for having me. I'm very grateful to be here. I appreciate it.
Dude, did I pronounce your second name right?
You did, yeah, that's rare, but you nailed it.
I'm just checking because I'd hate to start off on the wrong foot, because you're way bigger than me, you're way stronger than me. If I come over to the US, you'll end up crushing me one day, because forgetting someone's name is sacrilege. So there's going to be people that know your work, there's going to be people that not. Let's go in at the basic stuff. Tell people who you are and what you do.
Sure, I got started in the fitness industry in 1994 while I was still in school. I was a weak, skinny kid growing up, insecure, quiet, shy, and I was an athlete, but I wasn't a really good athlete, and I always just admired, back in those days in the 80s, I used to admire Arnold and Stallone. It was the days of the jack-up action heroes, and the 80s pro wrestlers like Hulk Hogan, the Ultimate Warrior, and grew up as a big fan of superheroes, so I was like, I want to look like that. And I want to be like that one day. So I started training, and I got nowhere. I just made every mistake in the book. And I trained all through 8th grade and high school, so for 5 years straight. And I ended up graduating high school at the same height I am now, 6 foot and 147 pounds. And then I just became really obsessed with it. And more and more, so while I was in school, I started studying more about it. Long story short, I got sick. I got tuberculosis, actually, and I had to come home from school, spend a semester basically on bed rest in the hospital. The doctor said if I didn't come in that day, I actually would have drowned because my lungs would have filled up with fluid. So during that time, I stayed home. I got my first certification, started training people 6 months later, and built up a business really fast. And then every dime I made, I saved up and put back into the business. And then I was able to rent space and have my first gym within a couple of years. And by the time I was 21, I had a really successful 6-figure training business while I was still going to school. Did that for another 10 to 12 years, and then started online. I think I started writing in 2001, started getting bigger in 2003, and then I started making money online and really growing a bigger following around 2005, 6-ish. And so, since then, I've done quite a bit online. I've written for pretty much every muscle and fitness magazine there is. Written a few books, I have a membership site program, podcast, blog, stuff like that.
Lots of stuff. See, the fact that you've had, I suppose, a kind of a difficult time right at the beginning, I believe that always makes the best coaches. You understand people, you understand problems, you understand hard work. I was obese, had ADHD, IBS, all this kind of stuff. It makes you a stronger person having to deal with that, rather than, I'm into the gym and I look good. And, there's a huge amount of personal trainers out there that, do get into the industry because they've lifted some weights and their body adapts, and they're like, well, I'm good at this stuff. I'm like, no, your body's just adapted, and you thought, why not, I'll go into it. So
that kind of person in any endeavor never makes the best coach or teacher, right? I mean, Michael Jordan's nowhere near the coach that Phil Jackson is. Whenever it comes natural to you, you're not normally going to end up as quite to your point, you're not going to end up being such a good coach. You have to struggle with stuff to be a better coach, I think.
I think you have to struggle a lot, even as an individual, to really then understand other people and the journey. Like, in the fitness space, there is a huge amount of arrogance from the people that haven't been through some kind of hardship, because you literally don't understand. You're not humble. You can't understand people's difficulties. Like, I'm probably, I have so much humility now as a coach. Granted, I'm more mature. I've done it for 10 years, but also I've kind of learned that there's so much more to kind of fitness and health than just, nutrition plan, training plan, do this and you'll be okay. And it's like, it's not. People have got their own problems. They've got kids, they've got houses, they've got lives, they've got stresses, they've got, lifestyle issues, etc. So that kind of leads me into trying to understand your work now compared to, let's say, 10, 20 years ago, because you've evolved hugely as a coach. I love that. And off air, we kind of touched on this thing about mindset and stuff. Now, when I first started listening to your work, you were very much into strength training. It was almost like quite alpha. It was strength training. We were lifting chains, all that kind of stuff. You were talking a lot about the paleo diet at the time. There was this kind of anti-inflammatory context of, getting people away from bad foods and stuff. And you kind of, you rode that for a while, and then it evolved with some other knowledge. And, tell me, I suppose, the journey over the last 10, 20 years of how you think your work has evolved, why, and where you're at now with your coaching and what you try and relay to people.
Okay, so in terms of just training specific, it's gotten a lot safer and smarter, I think. The funny thing is, over the 20-plus year journey, not that much has changed when it comes to the actual training. As you and I were discussing before, people tend to want to make training super complicated, make it too complex and confusing and scientific. It's not really that difficult. You can give anyone, even an elite level athlete, a lot of times only needs a simple plan. But so 20 years, a lot of that was wasted, honestly. I mean, a lot of the things, like anybody else, I've been guilty of getting suckered into the latest hype and this and that. Maybe I should read up on that. Maybe I should look at that. And I made those mistakes 10, 15 years ago, maybe even up to 5 or 7 years ago. I was still, saying, that sounds interesting. Let me investigate that. Well, what you have to as a coach, you have to know the latest and greatest stuff, but you have to have your foundational beliefs, stuff that you're going to stick with. So that really hasn't changed that much, which, in a way it's frustrating that I spent so many hours researching and going to these different seminars and stuff like that. And then I'm like, wow, not that much has changed 20 years later. But the small percentage of changes, maybe the 20%, have been significant. So now training is a lot smarter, it's safer. The general principles pretty much are the same. But, I was talking to Joe DeFranco recently where one of the biggest things for us is a smarter warm-up and just being smarter as you get older, especially. Now, years ago, I would train a lot of high school and college athletes. Now I train a lot of guys my age, 35, 40, 50. So when you get older, things like, just the sequence of exercise, certain modifications of the exercises become more important to make it safer. As far as mindset goes and how that applies to training, I thought it was, like you were saying earlier, that you could just hand someone a training and nutrition plan and that's it. Go do the work. Like the hashtag that everyone loves, to do the work. Well, it's not just that easy to do the work. You got to fix what's in your head first. And so mindset's super important. You have to develop habits. Someone smarter than me said that habits trump discipline, and that discipline's a myth. I kind of agree with that. You have to develop habits one step at a time. And now we know that it takes at least probably 66 days to form a habit. And you can only form one habit at a time. So if someone comes into you and they're eating fast food and they've never trained, and you say, okay, now we're going to train 6 days a week, and you're going to eat grass-fed beef, and you're going to do this, and you're going to sleep 9 hours a day, and you're going to do the foam roller for 20 minutes each morning, and all this, they're never going to do it. So it's just small. It's probably more realistic. There's this whole thing with the fitness industry on Instagram and everything where you're almost shaming people. And again, you were saying that before with this kind of this elitist attitude. But the longer you get to be a coach and the more insightful you become, you realize that it doesn't have to be like that. Like, most people are struggling with something. They only need really a simple plan, a few simple habits, and then build on those. And there's no quick fix. Like, you can't give someone a 30 or 90-day plan that's going to turn everything around. I mean, it's a lifestyle. You got to build in 12-month plan and then work, to your next 12 months. And it's small, bite off small chunks at a time.
Okay. Coming to the nutrition side of things, I'm primarily a nutritionist. That's kind of, my core focus. Where's your work changed? There was a time when you were very pro paleo. Is that still the case? Has it modified itself? Has it become a bit more real? Just give me an insight.
Okay, yeah. I mean, years ago it was basically the seafood diet. I just had to eat everything to get huge, So I went from 147 pounds to 230. I certainly wasn't lean at 230, but most of my clientele just wanted to get huge, and they were high school, college, and young pro athletes who could eat a ton, and so we didn't really pay a ton of attention to food quality as much, and that's another thing that's definitely evolved as I've gotten older and smarter. Is it paleo? I think for most people, paleo is a good starting point. And then safe starches, based on your level of activity. So adding in, more potatoes, any kind of potatoes, definitely white rice. And then if you can tolerate it, I'm not opposed to people eating oats or quinoa or stuff like that. I think that what happens is a lot of people develop kind of like a neurotic thing, and then they make themselves worse. So then they didn't have any food allergies or intolerances, but then they go super obsessive into a paleo kind of thing, and then now they can't eat anything. And if they walk by a restaurant that serves gluten, they start breaking out into hives. So you see a lot of people that have these issues where they create all these issues in mental in their head, and then it becomes physical too. So I think you can take it to the extreme, but as long as you're smart about it. I don't think, it's going to kill you to eat some quinoa. No, it's if you can tolerate it. There's a lot of people but me, for example, I know that I can't eat oatmeal. I like oatmeal, but when I have it, I instantly have all these weird side effects, and I get brain fog, and I get a little bit of a headache. But you have to know that I've known that since I was a kid. Like if you've always eaten oatmeal, and then you read a paleo book that oatmeal is no good, and then you start imagining those side effects, that's when I think we have a problem.
Because, especially when paleo got big, there was no way to not look at it. Like it became a bit of a superpower in nutrition, and it makes sense. We're removing foods that are allergenic. Now, yes, they drew a lot of conclusions from probably some poor data initially to say, everyone should not be eating these food groups. And it's like, well, hang on, let's slow down a little bit. So I kind of rode the wave a little bit, thought, yeah, actually, this is a problematic food in everyone. And I thought, well, no, we should be testing this. We should be saying, how about we listen to your body? You've just told me that oatmeal's a problem. You eat it, you experience bloating, it's probably gluten, let's test something out. Okay, gluten's not good for Jason, but doesn't mean gluten's okay for Ben or gluten's okay for someone else. So my kind of work evolved to say, well, we've got this purity understanding, real foods leads to energy, leads to health, leads to vitality, but guess what? There's still real life. There's still going out for dinner with your friends. There's still the kids' party. There's still, fuck it, if you want a Chunky or a Whisper or a Mars or a Kit Kat or whatever, you can kind of have that as long as 80-90% of the work is done.
Right. And I'm on 100% agreement with you.
Nice.
Yep.
Nice. So when let's talk about your phases of coaching, because you obviously still coach people. That's primarily your kind of role. Talk to me about the process. If someone comes in to see you, what do you tend to look at now? Because I know that you've breached the mindset psychology thing now. Do you kind of almost approach where someone is right now and then obviously implement the tools? Or do you find that 80-90% of people, you like to take down this process, like I'm going to breach this first, let's change that, and then we're going to move on with the other stuff?
Well, so I always start with mindset. And I found that almost everybody is dealing with the same issues. So one of the things we do now first is we kind of do an 80-20 evaluation of their whole life. So what are they doing on a daily and weekly basis? And that means work-wise, with their family, at home, how much time are they wasting? Almost everyone I see across the board is super stressed out. They have information overload, they're confused, they're trying to stay up on too many different books and blogs and emails and all these kinds of things like that, and they're doing too much. They're not sleeping, and it's funny because people will say, okay, tell me what to eat, give me a training program, I'll spend $5,000 a day on supplements, but they will not try to sleep more. So that's first and foremost. So we do this 80-20 evaluation, and I have them stop. I don't even want to discuss fitness first. I want them to stop doing things in their lives that are wasting time. So we hack off a bunch of stuff, and we go through the first month. We just spend, let's stop doing this, let's stop doing this, let's prioritize these few things, and the main thing is let's reduce the stress. Because stress and sleep, as far as I'm concerned, are the most important things. I don't care how perfect your diet is, your training program. If you're super stressed out, you're not sleeping, it's all a waste. So we got to get the stress levels down, and that comes from just identifying what is causing all this stress. What are you doing that's wasting too much time? And what sounds crazy from a fitness perspective, but I may have them outsource stuff to something like Fancy Hands or TaskRabbit, where I say, okay, you're a guy who makes $100,000 a year. You're doing all your own grocery shopping. You're wasting all this time going to the cleaners. You're doing this, you're doing that. That's time wasted where you could be getting better, you could be sleeping. Let's outsource that. So I take a very different approach. So we work on their life and cutting all that shit out at first, get the stress levels down, get them to sleep, and then we just make some basic nutrition and training changes from there. But that's the most important thing.
Okay. See, I find it interesting because probably over the last 20 episodes of this podcast, it's very much evolved into looking at the mind a lot more. And the more and more people I speak to, like yourself, other credible people in fitness, more and more people, are saying we need to look at this mindset stuff first. We need to look at the psychology. We need to look at the stress, because otherwise you haven't got the mental capacity for change. You've just said, if you've got all this shit going on in your life, then you can't handle my training program. You're not ready to accept the extra work and the change and the effort that you've got to put in.
Right. And then I'll even dive deep and have some difficult conversations with people, which I had to have actually just last week, where someone was in a long-term relationship and they didn't know that relationship, they're not married, but a few years dating someone, they didn't know that relationship was probably the biggest drain and the biggest anchor holding them down until we sat down and had a long conversation. I said, look, here's what you told me. We've evaluated everything. The biggest problem is this. And he said, you know what? You're right. I never thought about it. We got to sit down and have a talk, and I got to think about maybe if I have to end this relationship or make some major changes. So it had nothing to do. I could have given him a diet plan and a workout and this, that, and the other thing. And he's living with someone who's basically ruining his life and making it all impossible to do the things I'm telling him anyway. So sometimes you got to look elsewhere. It's not just what you're doing in the gym or what you're cooking for breakfast.
Fascinating. Yeah, we've had experiences in programs we run and stuff where you do sometimes, like, relationships are a huge part of our life. Like, the person that we are with is a massive part of our life, and if that's not a nourishing and positive relationship on literally every level, you can't just have a relationship where it's great in the bedroom and it's all right when you go out, but then the actual dynamics of living together, being appreciative of one another, if that doesn't work, then you're not going to make a lot of life progress. And it's actually a very hard thing to obviously talk to people about, and for people to actually accept that they are in an environment that is kind of draining and negative. But this is kind of real stuff. And whenever I do any kind of public speaking, I'm like, we need to be really real about this right now. We need to be really honest. And when I public speak, I put a photo of Pinocchio up on the slides before I start. And I'm like, if you're not ready to be honest with me right now and what I'm going to talk about, you almost need to leave. Like, I need you to accept where you are, and then there's going to be difficult changes for you to move forward. Because honestly, nutrition and training is simple, but all the other stuff outside it is complex but affects everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, let's not paralyze people's brains too much, because they're getting the picture. I want to kind of get back to the training a little bit, because there's always, when I asked the question about you coming on the show and what people want to know, there was a few comments about males and females. Now, there's always this kind of unique flower situation with certain sexes, usually more female. Now, when I look at your programs online, it seems quite alpha, quite male-dominated, muscle, that kind of thing. That's great, brilliant. You know what you want to do. When it comes to male and female, do you think there is much difference from a training perspective between training a man and a woman?
I personally do. Yeah, I think females can tolerate more frequency. They need a little bit more volume. They need less rest between sets. Slightly higher rep ranges. But the same holds true for a male who's a beginner and is weak. So I would train a 15-year-old male the same way I might train a 35-year-old female. When you're weaker, when you're not as neurologically efficient, when you don't know how to do exercises properly, you need more frequent exposures, and you can tolerate more volume because you're not going to be stressing your nervous system that much, you're not going to be stressing your joints that much, so you can train more frequently. I've never worked with a female who is ultra strong. I've trained females who have deadlifted 275, which I think is pretty strong. Squat 220. I don't think I've had a girl squat more than 225. But, that's pretty strong. But that said, those females can all still train full body 3 to 4 days a week. I haven't really gotten to the point where I had to have them split it up. Whereas guys, I tend to see their joints, especially as they get a little bit older or they get stronger, their joints seem to take a little bit of a beating with the higher frequency training. So I'll have them do it upper lower. Now, I have had some females occasionally that wanted to train with the guys that do upper lower, and that's worked as well. But I just tend to do full body with females more. With guys, I split it up more.
Okay, so looking at tangibles a little bit more, why do you think this is? What is it with females, kind of physiology-wise or muscle fiber type-wise, that is kind of allowing this difference in training? What do you think it is?
Well, honestly, it's like I said at first. It's that they're, no offense, but they're weaker than males. I mean, that's a fact. But that's why I said if I had a weak male, if I start a guy out who's 35 and he's never trained before, he's going to do full body as well. And then they just seem to recover faster between sets. That when you're smaller, obviously, if you have two males and one weighs 250, the other weighs 150, and they both do a set of 10 squats, the guy who weighs 250, regardless of anything else, is going to need longer between sets. He's going to need longer rest between sets. So just because they're smaller, they're weaker, in my opinion, those things make the biggest difference.
So would the guy that weighs a lot more and has more muscle mass need longer rest because their ability to exert force and almost train is harder?
Yes.
And greater? Okay.
Yes.
I've never actually, because to be honest, that's real common sense. If you think about it in terms of muscular recruitment, like my ability to recruit muscle and exert myself is going to be greater than someone younger and more experienced. And to be honest, I hadn't actually thought of it like that.
Right.
But then surely if you are looking at the multiple sides of training, well, I suppose this comes down to context. Like, for example, I play rugby. So there's a huge element of strength, power, muscle mass, speed, and conditioning. Yeah. And I obviously have to think about that. And I suppose that can often be the problem with a multi-discipline athlete, is that we're not just talking about the gym, we're talking about the field, the environment, the dynamics, the stress.
Absolutely, yeah.
So in that context with my question, I suppose really I've answered my own question in that you would just change the variables. You're no longer looking at the optimal output of just the gym and the weight because you've got to factor so much in. It's not just about the weight on the bar anymore.
You mean hypothetically, like for someone training for rugby, for example?
Yeah.
Yeah, so then it would be different. So if someone comes in and they're training for rugby, regardless of where they're at, I'm probably going to not have them do full body. The workout's going to be different because you have to do so much other stuff, right? You're running, you're playing, you have to do conditioning, you have to do speed work, you have to do plyos. So the volume's going to be lower. The time between each body part or muscle group or exercise is probably going to be a little bit lower. You're probably, in my opinion, I usually only have you training lower body once a week if you're doing a ton of running and your knees are taking a pounding. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it also depends, right? It depends on your age, the health of your knees, hips, lower back. So but probably no more than twice a week. It just depends on the athlete and their strength and experience level.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I can't really train lower body properly more than once a week because if we have some hard sessions, I just don't recover well enough before game day. It's just impossible. But I can give the upper body quite a hammering.
Yeah. How often do you train upper body?
Be twice a week and then lower body once a week generally.
Yeah.
But then I'll just get some kind of power-based movements in one of my other workouts for the legs to make sure there's kind of an extra stimulus element to the program.
Right. Just without any knee stress, I'd assume?
Yeah, not much knee stress. More like hips, hip flexor, lower back area. I find personally that's where there's more of the beating in the hip kind of area. So thinking about you talked about your training evolution earlier. You were discussing with DeFranco that almost your training's got safer and stuff. Now I think this is an interesting point. I was speaking to a coach of ours at the weekend, Mr. Stephen Ace, who's done a lot of Olympic lifting, kettlebell sport, taekwondo, and he said the amount of athletes that he's worked with that hasn't evolved their training frequency and principles enough are experiencing so much more joint pain because of the kind of methods that we've used, the frequency that we've used. I suppose that's your line of thought in that training's become different, more intelligent, safer, because actually, again, coming back to real life, there is life outside the gym that week, that training session, because if we don't have knees at 40, well, that's a problem.
Yeah. So high frequency, I get it makes sense. If you explain it to someone who just landed here from Mars, it would make sense that the more often you can do something, the better. And then people will look at Olympic lifters and they'll look at gymnasts and say, wow, you can train all this stuff every day. And you can to a certain point, but like you said, you're going to get to 40 or 50 and be destroyed. What a lot of people don't know is there's female gymnasts and they train every day, but by the time they're 21, they have arthritis in their wrists and they have all kinds of serious issues. There's been famous female Olympic athletes that come out and discuss that, in their early 20s, they're aching head to toe. So you can do it, but what's the long-term negative effect, A? And then B, are the results going to be that much better? If you do something 5 or 6 days a week versus doing it 1 or 2, it really depends. I mean, there's a reason why major league pitchers only pitch once every 5 days. When you're doing something stressful like that, maybe, Ben, you could squat 3 days a week for a certain amount of time and you feel fine. And people who are advocates of high frequency will tell you, you have to get through this period, you adapt to it, blah, blah, blah. But then when you're limping around at 40, like you just said, maybe it wasn't worth it. So you do have to think long term and you have to take into account all the other stuff you're doing. So now, I keep the volume and the frequency lower. That's one of the safety concerns that I was discussing earlier. I keep it lower for a lot of stuff than maybe I would have 20 years ago.
This obviously ties into goal setting because people come with certain goals to you. They have certain expectations. As a general rule, do you find that most people that come to you and discuss what they want to achieve almost isn't actually what they want to achieve? You have to go deeper and actually identify their goals.
Absolutely. And you have to know the right questions to ask. So if you continue to ask them why they want that, why it's important to them, why it has to happen now, what is the outcome of that, what does their life look like when they achieve that goal, sometimes, like you said, it's not exactly what they thought. And then we kind of have to dig a little bit deeper and figure out what's really going on and what they really want. It's not just that they want 17-inch arms. It's they want respect, or they grew up super insecure, or they want this and that. And then we can figure out other ways to get there, because some of the training or physique goals are unrealistic. A lot of times come to me and guys have never trained before and they're 38 years old and they say, I want to look like The Rock. And I say, you're setting yourself up for failure. Let's be realistic and figure out what else is missing from your life, personally, professionally, wherever it may be, that can make you happier. Because if what's going to make you happy is thinking that you're going to look like The Rock in 6 months, you're going to be miserable.
Although The Rock is an awesome dude.
Who wouldn't want to look like The Rock in 6 months? I'm just saying it's not a realistic goal.
And he's also a guy I'd love to have on this podcast. So if you know him, just send him an SMS for me and just hit him up.
Right.
I think this is interesting because, when we talk as practitioners, we put our information out there. Some of the resistance to change is that people will look at you and what you've said, same with me, and say, I can't look at this, I can't go deeper because I don't know how to change. And they think that you're expecting them to change, but most of the battle isn't about changing. It's just about identifying the root cause and accepting that that is part of you and how to work with it, not against it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. That's why I start with that 80-20 evaluation where I want them to literally stop doing, which sounds a little extreme, but my goal is, okay, let's stop doing, because I believe in the 80-20 rule across the board with life, relationships, business, fitness, whatever. So, and for those who don't know, you get 80% of your results from 20% of your efforts. So most of the stuff you do, for example, in business, if you run an online business and you're trying to do Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and email and blog, most of it's a waste of time. So you have to identify what is actually giving me the greatest return on investment. And it's usually only 20%. It's usually only 2 to 5 things that you're doing, and you should stop doing the 78 other things. But that's the same thing with your life, with your fitness. So we do this 80-20 evaluation, and if they can stop doing all these other things, and it might just be mundane minutia, but they're wasting their time, and then they don't have time to focus on the things that make them happy. When I eliminate all those other things, people are like, wow, I feel so much better. I'm less stressed out. I'm happier. And then because of that, now they can dedicate more time to their training, they're sleeping more, and we really don't have to change their training or diet that much. So it's just, I always find the common thing is I just get people to stop doing a lot of stuff.
So talking about practicality, there's obviously a lot of people on this listening to this podcast that want to just go away and do this themselves, almost do the 80-20 assessment themselves. Step by step, for someone at home right now, tell them how they can do this 80-20 assessment step by step by themselves. Okay.
So when it comes to fitness, everybody tends to be overwhelmed and trying to do way too many things. So write down everything you do. So I foam roll for this amount of time, or that you think you're supposed to do, right? Because you think you're supposed to do all this stuff, but it's unrealistic. Nobody's going to own a huge bag of all these different lacrosse balls and all these different bands and mats and everything. So you think you're supposed to do that. You think you're supposed to work on your posture for an hour and do deep breathing for an hour, and everybody has to meditate, and everybody has to do these really scientific workouts. So write down all this stuff you do and that you think you're supposed to do in your diet, and just keep track of that in a journal throughout the week. And then if you want to do the same thing for your business, which I highly recommend you should, and this works even if you're self-employed or you work for a company, and then just write down the things you do in your daily life. I go grocery shopping, I go to the whatever. And if you have a relationship, write down things that you do with your significant other, that you do for your relationship, how often you send them cards or text messages, whatever. And then you look at each area of your life. Okay, what really makes a difference? Has it made any difference for me to spend 20 minutes a night on the foam roller? Probably not. There's probably things you can do that are going to be more, going to be more beneficial and give you a higher ROI. Has it been, dramatically different since I cut out oatmeal, since I started obsessively timing between meals, all these things, and then you get down to, okay, at the end of the week, let's cross off this, because if I'm being honest with myself, this time spent foam rolling has done nothing. I'm no more flexible, I'm no more mobile. This time doing 6 training sessions a week has done nothing. I was just as big and strong when I trained 3 times a week, which I often find is the case, that most people can train 3 times a week and get the exact same results. I've never, honestly, in 20 plus years, I've never seen guys not get equally as strong training 3 days a week, it's 4 days a week, it's 5 days a week, or 6 days a week. So you don't need more than 3 days a week of strength training, in my opinion. And even with conditioning, people will overdo conditioning. A lot of times they'll just get worse. They'll get weaker. Somehow their conditioning will get worse. They'll say, I don't understand. I understand that if I do too much strength training, I get weaker. But it happens with conditioning too, because you're just so overtrained. Your conditioning numbers will drop. So just continue to try to do less, do less, do less. And I guarantee you, most things will improve. In your business, if you do less, with your whole fitness obsession, it's probably too much. You don't need to eat 17 times a day. You don't need to train 6 days a week. You don't need to spend all this time. Do you know Dr. Mark Chang?
I don't know.
Okay, so Dr. Mark Chang is a good friend of mine. Brilliant, brilliant guy. When it comes to healing the human body and assessing, he'll look at you and he kind of draws this little diagram, and you say, my left ankle's hurting, and he said, actually, it's something in your jaw, and he'll stick his finger in, adjust your jaw, and then your left ankle doesn't hurt. But basically what he said is, if most people would just learn how to breathe and forget all the different balls and rollers and stretches and band distraction, if they just spent 10 minutes each morning learning how to breathe properly and doing breathing, that would be better than spending hours a week doing all this other stuff. And I agree, most people don't know how to breathe, so their shoulders shrug every time they breathe, their chest breathing. That causes so much pain and so much dysfunction. So look at what's really making a big difference. I mean, I could go on and on about that, but basically just go through it. Go through your fitness, go through your business stuff, go through your personal stuff, make a huge list, fill a notebook, and then at the end of the week, be ruthless and evaluate and audit yourself and say, okay, this is a waste of time, this is a waste of time, this is getting me nowhere. And try to do 20% the next week. Hack off as much as you can.
Do you think, or do you encounter this problem that when people do this, you have to force them to be more selfish?
Absolutely. Yeah, almost every time. It's funny you said selfish, because they often say they feel guilty that they're not doing these things, or now that they have so much free time. So I'll get messages from clients and say, well, now I don't know what to do. I have so much free time. I feel guilty that I should be working or I should be doing something. And that's when I say, all right, dude, well, let's figure out what you're really excited about. Like, why, if you have this free time, are you not excited? Why wouldn't you be learning how to play the piano? What did you always want to do that you couldn't because you were wasting time, because you felt guilty about it? And now all of a sudden, I have guys who go out way more. They have more fun. They're not going out and drinking, but they'll just go out to lunch with friends more because they have more free time. Now they're learning how to paint or learning how to do things. You have to be selfish, because if you're not happy with yourself, you can't be your best self to help other people and make a difference in the world.
I think it's really interesting. I love the fact that we've been talking a lot about working out 3 times a week, because I get that people want to chase goals and want to change their body composition, and we know that there's a mentality of more is better. It's just like the natural way of the human brain, but ultimately we know the science of fat loss and training. We know that if you're in a calorie deficit, you have a minimum protein requirement, you eat good food, you're going to lose weight. And if the calorie deficit is decent across the week and you train 3 days a week, it's not going to be that much different to 4 or 5 days a week. Now, what you're talking about now with real life and why we do all this is, how much time does that free up for life?
I mean, it depends, right? It depends how much time you're wasting right now in everything you're doing. But across the board with everyone I have in my coaching program, it frees up a lot of time. People have so many extra hours in their days and weeks that they don't know what to do with them. So that's when I have to force them. It sounds almost funny to tell a grown adult, okay, why don't you go on meetup.com and join a softball league or do something like that? And they think they're not being productive, but now all of a sudden, 30 to 60 days later, they'll send me these crazy heartfelt messages like, I've never been happier in my life. I've seen them in tears. I've never, enjoyed life more. I've never been happier with myself, because they're getting out and doing things. They have so much more time that they're not wasting spending it in the gym or reading obsessively about training online. I had one guy who was subscribed to 154 different newsletters on fitness, email newsletters on fitness and productivity and personal development, and he was driving himself insane. And so the first thing I did was I forced him to unsubscribe to every single thing. I forced him to get rid of most of his books, and now he could not be happier. He's developing relationships. He's making much better progress. It's just amazing. But it's not unique. I see that all the time.
It's fascinating. Have you ever heard of 2 guys called the Minimalists?
Yes, big fan. I've read all their books. I love them.
Yeah, so I had those guys on the podcast like last year, and I just thought, I hope so many people don't actually, because the minimalist message in a way was a lot about objects, things in your life, tangibles. But I hope people have kind of, I suppose, drawn on common sense and said, how can I minimalize actually everything in my life and get out more? How can I maybe have less stress over my food? How can I train less and get the same result? How can I, spend less time on this and get the same result? And that's kind of what you're saying. It's like, let's minimalize everything we do and get the same result, maybe if not better result.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of those guys. And the book's The One Thing and Essentialism. Have you read those books?
Yeah, I read both of them. Brilliant books.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, you've already heard it, audience. There's a couple of good books for you. And let's try and be a little bit more strategic about everything. This is the day after we've just done our annual conference. We do a conference every year, and we talked a lot about mindset and change. And I did a massive call to action at the end, and I said, you guys need to go away and you need to assess everything that you do. You need to find out what makes you happy. Stop doing the things that make you unhappy. Stop obsessing about things. I'm like, every person in this room knows enough about nutrition and enough about training to get good results.
Definitely.
Yes, you've come to learn some tips, and we will give you some tips and some knowledge, but you have enough. Even reading 1 or 2 books will give you enough to do it.
Yeah.
But it's this kind of paralysis that we forced on the industry in a way by us doing our work of saying, read around the subject, learn about this, go away. And, everyone's become just paralyzed by everything. They haven't really known what to do.
Yeah. And I think you have to pick one coach. So pick one nutrition guy, one training guy, or that could be the same guy, and just listen to that one person. Like if you're going to learn guitar, fitness is weird because everybody listens to 58 different people. But if I was going to learn guitar, I would go for lessons to one guy, and then I wouldn't go the next day to another guy, and the next day to another guy, and the next day to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's very odd with fitness. And I think what most people should do is invest. Anything that's free is useless in general. So if you invest in yourself, you're going to get more out of it. So if you're really struggling and you're going through that cycle that Ben and I are discussing where it's paralysis by analysis and you're overwhelmed with all this information, hire somebody to write your training program and nutrition program. Even if you just do it for 90 days, just listening to one person and outsourcing it and taking it off your plate and removing decisions. Because most people have to make way too many decisions over the course of a day. So decision fatigue is a real thing. That's why I let my wife decide what we're going to have for dinner, because I have to make too many other decisions. I don't want to decide what we're going to have for dinner. But the reality is if you hire a coach, you will get so much better results. So if a lot of times friends come to me and ask how to get in shape or how to build their business, both things I sell information on. So I say, I'm not going to tell you, but I will tell you someone to hire, because it's not going to do any good for you because you're not paying for it. And it's going to annoy me because you're not going to do it. So I'm going to tell you a couple of my friends that are great. The funny thing is they'll give them the exact same business plan or the exact same training plan that I would. That's why I refer them, because I trust them and we think the same way. But because they paid for it, now that person is going to actually do it. So I think you should always invest in yourself. Always, always, always. Even coaches need coaches. Whatever you want to get better at, you should always hire a coach. I hire coaches at least twice a year for a period of 90 days up until a year. I actually just joined a year-long coaching program with someone this weekend. So definitely invest in yourself.
Couldn't agree more. We spoke about it in the past. Most people don't need the knowledge of the coach. They actually just need the honesty and clarity, direction.
And the accountability, yeah.
Yeah, it's like I've very rarely done an internship where people have spent time with me, or a Skype call where I've poured out all this knowledge, because the knowledge is in so many different places anyway. I've just said, stop doing that, do this, be honest with yourself, create a plan, stick to it, change this habit, come back to me in a month and tell me how amazing your results have been. Definitely.
And it's funny, Ben, because sometimes it's frustrating. I never get to share half of the knowledge I have. I'm like, oh man, I read all those books and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on all these seminars, and I never get to share it with anyone because they don't really need it. They just need a simple plan, and you just need to tell them to stop doing a few things,
Amazing. Well, I hope people go away and do their own 80-20 plan, because I think it's such a simple tool, and quite often the simple tools are the best. Let's be honest. We've talked so much about simplicity, honesty, minimalising your life, getting the important things in order. I just think this information that you've imparted today is just absolutely essential. So, Jason, I'd love people to be able to find you if they've been interested and kind of resonate with you today. where do you want to send people to discover your work and some of the cool things that you do?
My main website is jasonferruggia.com, and since my name is hard to spell and remember, renegadefitness.com will redirect you there. And you can find across social, I'm at Jason Ferruggia, so on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and you can find all that via my site, jasonferruggia.com.
Nice. And you also have a podcast too, right?
I do have a podcast, yeah. We haven't been recording as much lately, but I'm going to be getting back into it more.
Jason, consistency, what happened, man?
I know. You know what happened is there was a few other major projects that were more important, and some stuff I can't discuss yet. I'm just waiting to hear back on. And then I got a concussion for a month, and I was just completely out of it, so I couldn't. I just had a splitting headache, and I was dizzy and nauseous for about a month, so
wow,
wasn't able to do that, yeah.
Jesus. Well, Jason, honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure. Followed your work for a long time. Have a huge amount of respect for your work. Keep doing what you're doing. I think it's fantastic.
Thanks so much.
We will get this show out there. As I request everyone that listens to this show, if you've enjoyed what we've said, if something's resonated, if you're going to take an action, if you're going to change, if you want to give us some feedback, tag me and Jason in on Twitter. Get a conversation going. Jason will reply. I'll reply. The conversation's appreciated. Don't let this stuff fall on deaf ears. Say, yes, I've done the 80-20 thing. I took action. I did this. I changed this. Thank you, Jason, because it's kind of good, but also it shows that you're taking action. Like, if no one does anything, we know that 15,000 people have either nailed this stuff or have taken action. And I believe that an awful lot of people haven't taken action by not saying anything. So take action. Don't leave this stuff stewing.
I love it.
Jason, leaves me to say thank you. All the best in the future. And everyone that's listening, I will see you next week. In the meantime, stay awesome. Hey everyone, Ben Coomber Radio, episode number 164. Can you tell I've been really on point with all the numbers so far? I bought myself an abacus as an early Christmas present, and I can now count, which is lovely. I have had a string of guests on the show recently.